Last week we covered chapter 3 and we talked about goals and we talked about their importance. We looked at three different kinds of goals. The first one was mission and vision statements, and these are the things that define companies, departments, and projects. They're high level. They really kind of exist in continuum with the company. And then we talked about objectives. Now, objectives were a little bit lower level. They are aligned with the missions and vision statements. Objectives are, as the book described, they have measurements so that you can achieve your objectives, and they will lend you into your mission and your vision statements. And then we talked about policies, and policies are tactical, personal things that we do that the company has set out. So here's how you're going to do something, and by following the policies will help us meet our objectives, which will also ultimately tie back to us meeting our mission and our vision statements. And then we talked about how all these tie into requirements. Now, goals and requirements, sometimes they can sound similar, but they're very different. Requirements are very well defined. Well, good requirements are very well defined, and they're agreed upon by everyone. Goals are not necessarily well defined or agreed upon. Goals can be held individually by stakeholders as well as collectively by an organization. Then we also talked about, did a quick overview of how do you find goals, and we looked at workshops. And workshops, you capture a lot of information, but you don't necessarily go very deep, and you do have that all-important thing called conflict resolution. And the conflict resolution is important because when you're doing doing interviews individually with stakeholders, you're going to find goals that conflict with each other. So the advantage of the interview was that it may be a narrow in breadth, but you're actually able to get some depth into what is needed in the project, but you're getting one person's perspective. So it's important to have interviews and workshops in order to get a fully well-rounded perspective of your project and understanding what the goals are. Now, the book kind of laid out that, advantages and disadvantages to doing the workshop first or the interview first and then the workshop, and it listed out its pros and cons. In reality, you're going to do both, and you may do both multiple times. What I've done in the past, I am most comfortable meeting with the stakeholders individually first, find out what's important about them, find out what kind of, what makes them tick. And then, once I capture some of their goals, take that back, I regroup, I try to find out some areas that I need to address, and then I walk into a workshop with all the stakeholders armed and ready to pull out the information that needs to be pulled out. And I've also had a chance to build a relationship with the stakeholders. But what happens in a workshop, typically you'll get action items, and you have to when you leave the workshop, then you have to go work on these action items, which means you have to have another round of interviews with some, maybe not all, of the stakeholders, and then you come back for another round 2 of the workshop. It's very possible you could have more action items where you'd have to go out, meet with stakeholders again, and then bring it all back in another shorter, hopefully, workshop. So the idea here is that it's not just one iteration of both. Be prepared to have multiple iterations of going back and forth until you finally get it right. Now, in preparing for this class, tonight's class, I came across an article which I really wanted to bring to your attention related to goals, and it's one that I think just totally brings the goals and their importance full circle. About 5 or 6 years ago, the FBI was working on a project. They contracted out. It was a $170 million project to manage all of their case files and investigations and evidence and all of this in one huge accessible database. And it was called the Virtual Case Management System, Case File Management System. And they had some problems with it. So take a look at this headline here. This is from Gartner. and its lack of goals and specifications, this is another word for requirements, dooms FBI's virtual case file management system. Now this, it's a 6-page document. This paragraph here is kind of a takeaway. So if you don't read anything, here's what you need to know as you go forward. I pulled out a few things here. Determine the measures of success by linking measures to goals. So this is another word for what we call acceptance criteria. You don't know what success looks like if you don't define it. And so that's what they didn't do here. They did not define success. And they did not link it back to their goals. And then secondly, decide on goals and what constitutes success or failure before beginning the project. Keyword, before. This company, SAIC, they were contracted to come in and build the project, not necessarily create the requirements for it. The FBI was going to do that. The FBI did not do a very good job of that, so SAIC, they decided that they would, move ahead as much as they can. In a contract like this, especially one that expensive, you definitely want to go ahead and start billing and get to work so that you can start making money. Well, there was a problem with that. The project wasn't ready to kick off. Not going to go all through this, but I did want to point one other area. It was a criticism of the project management, a lack of visibility into risks that delayed the cumulative effect of scope creep. So this was something that they didn't know what problems they were having. They had no visibility into the risks, and it led to this thing called scope creep. We're going to talk about it later on, well, actually here in a few minutes. And this really, the next statement really sums up the problem with this project. No clear-cut goals. So if you don't have clear-cut goals, you don't know what you're building, and then you can't really define your requirements because, again, you don't know what you're building. You don't know what you need requirements for. And if you don't have good requirements, and you don't have requirements, I call it requirements with conviction. You don't know, that these are mapped back to what somebody wants, then what somebody wants will change regularly. Now this project had lots of change requests. In fact, they averaged 1.5 change requests per day. That's outrageous. One a week is way too much. But the whole problem with this project is no goals meant poor requirements, and they didn't know what their risk was. And later on, they received just so many change requests. They had this thing called scope creep, which absolutely killed them. All right, so now we'll get into Chapter 4. Didn't want to do that. Chapter 4. Okay, this week we're going to be talking about context, interface, and scope. So when we talk about context, we're really talking about the environment that this project is being pulled together in. So again, talking about that onion model, looking at the outer environment area, this kind of represents the context, the domain of the project. And understanding this as an analyst will help you make better decisions, will help you, will guide you in your discovery process. Interfaces, every project has a boundary, and the interface will be, these are the ins and outs through these boundaries into your product. So these interfaces can be person to person, machine to machine. They could be machine to person or vice versa. And then finally we talk about scope, and this really is what we reference to what is in scope, what things we can say yes to, and what is out of scope, things that we'll say no to as far as the kind of work that we're going to be doing on the project. So we'll be answering the questions: what should be included and what gets left out? Where is the boundary of the system? What are the boundaries of this product? And going back to the onion model, remember the core of the onion is your product, and the next circle out is the system. So the product is the software that we're developing, and the system involves the people who need to make that product, help that product get delivered as far as the final state, not talking about development. And then what approach do you need to define the scope? Okay, so we're going to talk about, or kind of reference two things in this conversation, hard systems versus soft systems. And this is not to be confused with hardware versus software. Soft systems in this respect refers to, again, going back to that, the onion model, and it's all those things on the outside. It's the domain, the environment, things we call context. So these are kind of overlapping and almost synonyms for each other. Things that aren't necessarily well defined, and that's okay. But as we move into through the layers from the outside to the inside of that onion model, then we start to hit into the hard systems, and the more towards the center you go, the harder the systems become. So when we refer to the soft systems and the hard systems, there is a relationship and there is a dependency between the two. So we're going to talk about that now. So you remember 2 weeks ago, I told you a story, and I like to make furniture, and so in my story, you came to me and you asked me to build you a table. I built it for you. I basically just took two very simple requirements. One was how tall do you want it, and the other one was, how wide do you want it? And I went and built the table. You liked the work I did. You took it home, and you brought it back the next day. You said, this table's no good. It wobbles. So when we went back to your house, I realized that the table was sitting on a patio floor. And then it all of a sudden dawned on me that this table does not have a steady floor or a level floor. Therefore, I need to make a different table. And I brought back a three-legged table because three-legged tables don't wobble. They may not be level, but they don't wobble. And that's an example of the hard system versus the soft system. So the soft system, according to the book, is soft systems work with issues that influence the product, including political, social, and economic forces. And when the soft system work is complete, then it's safe to address the hard system issue. Now the key word here is safe. So what happened in my example is I attended to the hard system before giving any mind to the soft system. The soft system in this example was the environment that the table is being used in. The table itself is the hard system. And because I ignored the soft systems up front, I had to make some assumptions about what the environment that surrounds the table. I assumed that that table was going to be used inside on a level floor, and maybe 9 times out of 10 that assumption would have served me well, but in this case it cost me the price of my material and time for making the table. Now making this kind of mistake leads to what we call the largest risk for any project, and that is scope creep. Scope creep is really the additional work that is added in later, and there's after the budget and after the resources and after the time has already been calculated, that other things start to come in because they were things that we missed. The reason we missed them, going back to the FBI case study, is that we had poor requirements because we had poor goals. And not understanding the soft systems will also lead us to be in a position where we will incur scope creep. So I have a video here for you to watch, and we'll pick it up after the video.
Those poor web designers. I mean, I had no idea. Scope creep changed my life. I'm sorry. I can't talk anymore. I'm sorry.
Scope creep is evil. Hopefully we've designed a website that can meet all your needs.
Hopefully. After you're finished with the website, I want to be able to make changes using Dreamweaver.
Great, I can set you up using FTP so you can access the files directly. And you know I've used templates to make changing the content easier.
The uneditable regions are the areas where the content changes less frequently.
Wait, is something wrong?
Why does it have to be so complicated?
I'm sorry, you said you wanted to use Dreamweaver.
Well, why can't I just use Microsoft Word?
Microsoft Word?
I use it for all my other things.
Right now, I'm enrolled at the Academy of Web Design and Technology, but after seeing scope creep, I'm dropping out. I'm gonna join the armed forces. Safer.
Okay, so coming to a theater near you. All right, so what exactly is scope creep? Well, according to the book, we already discussed it a little bit. It is when new features are added to product designs that have already been approved without providing equivalent increases in budget, time, and or resources. Now, unfortunately, your book did not spend a lot of time on scope creep. In fact, I think it just mentioned it just very briefly in the entire book on just one page, page 76. This is such a critical piece of building software, of understanding this and avoiding it. But the reason I'd like to see more of it in the book is because it is so easily prevented with good analysis and good business requirements and goals and functional requirements. All right, so why does scope creep happen? Well, the first reason here, and this is the same source from the definition that I read, poor requirements analysis. Customers don't always know what they want and can only provide a vague idea. You've heard it. I'll know it when I see it. Well, guys, that's how I pick out my clothes. That is not how we build software. Now, there are times when a customer needs to work with a designer to build a user interface, a screenshot, and it's okay to say I'll know it when I see it when you're talking about a design, but that is, to produce something and then show it to the customer and say, well, is this what you want? No, that's not how we build software. We plan it out ahead of time, whether we're doing waterfall or agile. We're always understanding what the customer wants to our fullest ability. Not involving the users early enough. Thinking you know what the user wants or needs is a serious mistake. So you saw in my example with the table, if that were a real life situation, that mistake would have cost me, the time and effort and material of making that table. So involving the user early is a necessity. Involving them in the requirement process. Also, you can pull them into the design phases. Now, caveat here is design referring to user interfaces, user experience, the thing the customer sees. You would not pull them into an architectural design phase. Understanding the complexity of the project. So a lot of times when we start projects, we're building projects because we can't buy them. One of the things you'll learn if you spend a lot of time in IT, especially getting into IT management, it's always cheaper to buy rather than to build. For example, there's a lot of people building inventory management systems, a lot of people building accounting system, a lot of companies building point of sale systems. So there's no reason why someone should build something that already exists, because they're going to get it for cheaper when they buy it. And that there's a word for that. It's called COTS, C-O-T-S, and it stands for commercial off the shelf. So the reason we build software is because we can't go out and buy it. And what that means then is you're generally getting into an area that hasn't been explored yet. And that's where you hit this certain level of complexity. And you've heard the old adage that says, we don't know what we don't know. You can stand here and look down the road and say, I know where I want to be, but I just don't know how I'm going to get there from here. Because we're dealing with technologies that are not proven maybe, or we haven't done something, it's beyond our skill set. So getting into complexities of a project basically means that when you're standing up front and you can't plan everything out, then somewhere down the road you're going to expect for there to be some surprises, and those surprises will come in the way of scope creep. Lack of change control. You can always expect that somewhere down the road you miss something and it's going to come back and be something that gets thrown into the mix after the budget and the time and the resources have already been allocated. That's to be expected. This whole idea of change control, it came like waterfall, it came from the construction industry. So, the builder built the house, customer came up, said, hey, great window, it just needs to be 2 feet to the left. And if that's not what was on the plans, then a change control is required. So the builder pulls out a piece of paper, he writes some notes, he takes it back to the architect makes some design changes, calculates what has to be done and the cost associated, gets it back to the builder, and the builder shows it to the customer, says that change request is going to cost you $1,200. That's exactly how we do it in software. That's how we do it in waterfall methodology of software development. In Agile, we don't have a change control process because it is built into the methodology, meaning that we have a list of things that we're going to work on. We put the most important thing on top and we just pull from the top. And if you want something added in, you just slide it wherever it is appropriate, meaning as far as it's providing the appropriate meaning it's positionally stacked for the value that it's going to find. So the items that we're working on first provide the most value. The items on the bottom of the stack provide the least value to the company. And we allow the customer to control that. In Agile, we don't have a fixed set of functionality, a fixed scope that we're delivering. Most Agile projects it's time and material, meaning we'll just build it, and when we run out of time or money, we'll be done. But you may not have everything done, but you'll have the most important things done. That's how Agile works, and one perspective. The other is gold plating. Gold plating is where you're just adding stuff because you think it adds value. I see this most often with architects and developers. The architects and developers are creating things that they think will be useful later on down the road with another project, and as a result, they kind of load up stuff in the system because it's going to be useful, and right now for this project it just makes this project heavier, makes it fatter, makes it more complex, and it ultimately comes at a cost, and the customer normally pays that cost, or your company pays the cost for incurring that change. So where in the video did the scope creep start? So if you recall, the computer consultant was closing his laptop and said, I hope we created a good website for you, and the lady said, hopefully. And then she said that she wanted to be able to make updates with Dreamweaver. He said, yep, no problem, we can do that. Then he went on to do some tech speak that she totally didn't understand, and she gave him that look and said, why can't I just use Microsoft Word? Well, this is where it starts. Had he, in the beginning, addressed this, how do you want to make, if he just asked a question, how do you want to be able to update your system? Do you have a preference? She could have said, I want to do it with Microsoft Word. He could have added that into the mix. But the reason he was banging his head is because he probably realized I didn't address the issue. I didn't address the soft side issue with this lady. And that's how it happens so often, and that's why it's so critical to the especially to the analyst to be able to cover all these things and to understand not just the not just the product that you're making, but the system that is around it. How are you going to make updates? That's a part of the system. Who is going to be able to make updates? That's a part of the system. Apparently, he did not address that, and it's going to cause scope creep. Now, this is not an unnecessary requirement necessarily. It certainly would have been a part of the original set of requirements had he captured it. So, in addressing the discovery of system requirements and minimizing scope creep, it really involves two things. It's understanding the soft side, the human activity side. That's exactly what we saw in that video. The soft side was the woman wanting to make updates with Microsoft Word. And then it's solving the problems of building the product, or the hard side. So the soft side, this is called business analysis. The hard side, this is really what we refer to in system analysis. This course is focused on the soft side, the business analysis. We also get into now business analysis leads to business requirements. It also leads to functional requirements. Functional requirements kind of bridge the gap between business and system requirements. It's drilling down further. But really, the business requirements, as we've already discussed, really states, what is probably the most is the item that is most aligned with the goals, and that's what we're here to understand. How do you take those goals from the client and turn them into business requirements? So, what tool do we use to represent the soft systems? That tool would be the rich picture. Now, this rich picture is not like a real rich picture. This is a textbook, literally, rich picture. This is you'll only see a nice looking rich picture like this in a printed document, because a real rich picture is one that you would see on a whiteboard with a group of people with their magic markers and drawing their pictures and their little stick people. But all that aside, a rich picture, though there are no set rules, really should show a few things. They're supposed to show relationships, transactions, boundaries, identifying what's in the system and what's out of the system, defining the points where things go in and things go out. You want to see, the relationships between people, the relationships between people and machines. Machines and machines, you want to understand the transactions that are happening. And what we're looking at here is a rich picture for a restaurant, but you can't really see what the system is, and that's okay. We want to understand, remember, we're dealing with the soft system, which we want to understand all the influences that occur on the restaurant, regardless of what system we're building. So the rich picture should show influences. It should depict relationships, whether that is between humans or machines or between both. Reflect processes. It should represent risk. There is, I think, at the bottom of the picture, there is a little rat, so that was maybe the risk in this particular environment. Inputs and outputs. These will ultimately become your interfaces, and you want to be able to show the system boundary. That's not always going to be easy, and it's certainly not always going to be a straight line, but you should be able to kind of decide what little icon is a part of your system and what little icon or picture, stick figure, is not a part of your system. So if you remember, I've talked about it before in this class as well as in my 2010 class, the 5-component framework. So this is what a information system is made up of. It's not just hardware and software. It includes the data, includes the procedures that the people use. And When you move to the left, the things that you're dealing with, the change is less difficult. As you move to the right, things become more difficult. Change becomes more difficult. When you move to the left, risk becomes it's less of a risk to deal with issues over here. There's more risk when you're dealing with issues that involve people and their procedures. So when we talk about hard systems and soft systems, the hard systems are the ones that are the software and the hardware. Um, and when we start talking about the soft systems, again, on the 5-component framework, we're talking about the people and the procedures. So I tell you, and I've said this before, this one model, if you fully understand it and you know how to employ it, this is worth your tuition for this class, because this is a very powerful tool, and not many people I've seen can really understand it. Who I do see using it and understanding and succeeding with it, it's high-level managers, successful managers who realize that when they build a system, it's not just hard systems they're building. It influences the things on the soft side. So when we talk about the system boundaries, it's logical to ask, where should you create the system boundaries? And really, really, it depends, my favorite answer. What is always included in the system boundary? Well, it's different for each project. So I know at this point I'm not helping any. How do you know when you have the system boundary finally identified? Well, here's the thing. You're going to have stakeholder agreement. You're going to have consensus. And what if you don't have the stakeholder consensus? Well, then you have a problem. So what do you use to drive stakeholder agreement? Well, the answer is, we just covered it, the rich picture. So that makes it all clear now, right? Well, the thing that the book didn't really tell you is that they showed you this rich picture, but they didn't tell you that it is a result of an effort, of a collaborative effort between the stakeholders. So what happens, you get the stakeholders into the room and they start drawing and they start solving their problems and collaborating and listening to each other and erasing and starting over until they come up with what looks like their environment. And I've got a video for us to watch, and it really kind of explains this. And so you can see it's going to take that rich picture and make it kind of jump off the page, and you're going to truly understand how important the rich picture is into building good systems and driving that consensus among the stakeholders.
We always enter situations where we're a bit guarded about giving too much away about ourselves, about our position. Well, often the images we draw, we're not entirely sure how to defend ourselves, if you like.
The most complex situation we can think of, which is all the things that people do in the sea and the way the sea affects society.
And so what they do within the group is essentially negotiate a kind of common, agreed understanding between them as to what they think that experience is.
9 billion people, you can affect something as large as sea.
We need a city, so let's say this is the city line.
Yeah.
So this is going to be our city limit.
If you get them to sit round a table together and co-draw a rich picture containing all of their thoughts, talking to each other, sharing, passing the pen, drawing the picture, what you've done in one simple device is brought the expert to the populace, you've brought the populace to the expert.
We're now catching things we don't want to catch.
Yes.
Which brings people into one shared frame of reference.
But litter is a really big problem.
Is it such a big problem now as it was, say, 30 years ago?
But we're also creating a problem here.
Okay, well, how have we changed any of this in order to make it better?
We can build roads with a collecting system.
Fish tanks?
You need them
on the bed.
mean, could we make a living out of doing this?
You get a deep sense of the complexity.
It was Maria's alien species.
I love the alien species.
But you can speak to other people and draw
When
it.
you're drawing, that's true. And they can come up with several of the problems with draw without really having any idea.
Yeah.
They will understand what is some of the problems we're drawing here.
Rich pictures help define the boundaries, which help identify the internal and external interfaces. Now, the internal interfaces, these are going to be interfaces where the project controls both sides of the interface, or the interface, both sides of the interface exist inside of the system. As you can imagine, external interface, the project is subject to requirements from that outside system. So I like this definition because it is important to note that when you have an interface with an outside system, you have to deal with the requirements of that outside system. Very much like going to another country. If you want to visit another country, you have to deal with their rules of entry. If they want a passport is good, then you need a passport. If you also need a visa, then you just have to do what they ask. So this is one of those unknowns sometimes, is not fully understanding what is required of an external interface with another system. So once you identify the interface, well, then what? Well, first you need to identify what kind of an interface it is, between peoples and products or machines, or between machine to machine. And then once you identify that, then you're not done. You're not done just identifying. Then you really need to dig down and discover more about that interface. If it's between people and people, then you really need to study the soft systems. You need to interview the stakeholders. You need to define or understand the business processes. If it's between people and products, then you're going to get involved in writing user scenarios and prototyping, and considering other like products that may be able to shed some light on the nature of the interfaces that you're going to be dealing with. And if it's between products, that's where you probably need to go a little bit deeper and talk to developers that are closest to the interface, identifying standards that may be involved depending on the subject that you're working with. And then as far as recording these for between people, you're basically going to write a procedure. If it's between people and products, write the procedure that reflects the interaction. And it's important to say from the person's point of view, from the person's viewpoint. Capture the sequence of steps taken when interacting with the product, and ultimately you want to capture the inputs and the output, capture the data that is involved in this interface. If it's between products, you want to capture the data that is exchanged and the expected behavior, and also capture any standards that are used in this type of interface. In the same way that soft systems have the rich picture to help define the soft system, the hard systems has the context diagram to help define the scope of work as a whole. So this is really now getting more into the core of your product or project. It depicts the systems to include, and especially to include, the external interfaces. And as an analyst, you need to make sure that you do not create a context diagram prior to fully exploring the boundaries, or another way of saying it. Don't dig into the context diagram until you fully understand and realize your soft systems, and you have agreement on your rich picture with your stakeholders. So the event list is really an extension of the context diagram. It's a context diagram first, and then you move into your event list, and it's used to depict what is in scope and out of scope. So this is straight from the book, and the product in this case is a jetliner, is an aircraft, and I think it's a great example because it really does put this into place. Things that have to happen. The aircraft is the product. It's the center of the onion model. But then all these other things kind of make up the system, the next layer out, the baggage handling, refueling, resupply, air traffic control. These are all things that are absolutely required for this plane to operate. So these things are also a part of the system. Now there are other things that are questionable, but and that's what this is all defined to do. So baggage handling, yes, we have to get bags on the airplane. That's an event. This becomes a place where an interface occurs. Refueling, that is also an event. There's an interface right there, being able to hook up to the plane. Resupplying the food and drinks, again, another event, another interface. Air traffic control, here's a different kind of interface, but it's an event that also happens in the plane. So what that leads you to is creating an event list. You talk about all the things that can touch your system, all the things that can change your system, all the inputs, all the outputs. You create an event list. Now, one that's not here that could be here would be loading of passengers. That's another event. There's another interface. And they clearly said checking in passengers, that's out of scope. Loading the passengers might be in scope. Checking in the passengers is out of scope. Airport security, certainly that would be out of scope, but aircraft security would probably be in scope. I don't know if this is really clear, but this is where you arrive at this with consensus from the stakeholders, because as soon as you say that something is out of scope, no one's going to argue that things are in scope. Well, there are a few times you may argue, but when you start saying that things are out of scope, then all of a sudden people are going to be they're going to start to pay attention to what you're saying. Events becoming requirements. So here is where we start really digging into the written requirement, event handling requirements. It's a great place to start. And there's no set way of doing it. There's some rules of thumb, and that's really what we're looking at. Here's an example. When an event is detected, then do the following action. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward and logical. Every time period, do the required actions. So what this looks like in the written form is, for an example, if an account balance exceeds the private banking threshold, and these are all values that are held somewhere else, if the account balance exceeds private banking threshold for a qualifying period, then issue private banking invitation to the customer. I don't really like the way that's written. I think this is from the book, but it does give you an idea of taking an event. When the event happens, then what are you going to do about it? And that's what we're doing here. This is really best handled in tables, and you'll see this often. Reading that kind of statement before, the reason I don't like it is because it's just kind of hard to read. You sort of trip over the syntax, but when you put it into a table, then it becomes a whole lot easier to read and to understand. So you've identified, here's the wind condition. These are all the conditions that we're monitoring, and when this happens, then you're going to do this other thing on the right side. The input events, or that was an input event, output events, these look a lot more like traditional style requirements. Usually it looks something like this. The operator role shall be enabled to do the following action. So this becomes the retail sales assistant shall be enabled to print a sales receipt. or the product, now it's not a person, it's a product, shall do the required actions with ABC performance. Becomes the point of sale system, and sometimes it's just called the system, shall print a sales receipt within 10 seconds. So we've covered a lot of items here. There's a lot to think about, and later on we're going to get into some of the tools that will help you help lead you through this process as you lead your clients through the process. But what happens if you miss something? And I promise you it will happen. Even to the seasoned veteran, it will happen. So your book, I pulled something out of your book. I thought it was really appropriate. You might discover a missing requirement when, on the basis of clues from your interview campaign, you create from your own interpretation of your findings. So that's the key. What happens is you're meeting with people, you're trying to understand their perspective, and we've kind of talked about it. It's related to that telephone game I was telling you that we played in grade school, and you take your interpretation to the next interview or workshop, and someone in there mutters, you may want to look into that. I'm not quite sure that's exactly right. I think you may have to consider something else, or go check with Bob. And this is what's going to happen, and this is why you, when you meet with someone and you draw conclusions out of that, you want to take it back to the group and get their feedback or get their confirmation, so that you're not going to go down a path, heading down this path thinking you understand when you really don't. No matter how good of an analyst you are, this is something that you absolutely need to do. Let me see. So I basically just restated all this. It's also possible that asking the question will result in the issue of a new table of authors. Okay, so what happens is you may actually get into this process and you bring it back to the group. You may identify some new requirements. Somebody's light bulb may go off. They may hit their forehead with their hand and say, gosh, I can't believe we didn't think about this. And next thing you know, up pops another can of worms, and you've got to dig through and discover new requirements. So like I said, a lot of things we have reviewed tonight. It's gotten more, into the details, and we're going to next talk about the project that you're going to be working on. I'm going to show you some templates that you can use, some things that will help guide you through this process. So that is it for Chapter 4, and we will see you after the break.